Black people, so-called, were put into Indian schools also. Did you know that? In fact, they called them freedmen schools later because they didn't call them that at the time. And to be honest, our schools came about before the fake $5 schools came about. Because when you look up the list of Indian boarding schools without saying freedmen or black, it'll give you this list. The earliest one is 1871. 79 is the Carlisle School, one of the most corrupt. 84, 1902, 90, 98, 71, 93, blah, blah, blah. So they were open at those times, nothing earlier than 1871. Whereas here you have the Tallahassee Freedmen School list, well, the Freedmen School list. You got the Tallahassee Labor Mission open in 1850. Okay, you got the Coweta. It doesn't have an opening date. This one doesn't have an opening date. This one opened in the it says late 1800s, 1870, 70, 70, 75, 1878, 92, 74, 70. 1850, 1843, so Tallahassee is one of and Coweta are some of the most earliest ones, well before those other ones. You know, like the Carlisle School that I showed you had everybody dressed up in military outfits and they went to war, with proven records of the Carlisle sending their people to World War. But our schools weren't like that. In fact, some of those early 1850 schools really opened during the time not too long after the Indian removal of 1830. And then you see also a photograph in 1891. It says the beautiful Indian territory, and it's nothing but melanated folks, except in this corner some white tea folks. Now let's talk about this man who went to that school. Because what was going on at those schools if the other schools were used to train immigrants in the military? Well, this dude, I actually found him while I was reading something in the 5 Civilized Tribes census report.gov from a .gov source. And in there, as my nosy ass was reading, it said the Negroes amongst the earnest blah, blah, blah 5 tribes. It says the Creek Nation affords the best example of Negro process. The principal chief, virtually a Negro, comes of the famous Creek Annals. His name is Legues Chateau Perryman. So Mr. Perryman was a Creek Indian chief who was virtually a Negro, according to a government document. And I found a biography about Mr. Perryman on a website here, and it says that his mother had unalived in these years, and he said, I was sent to the Tallahassee Manual Labor School in 1850, received a good common school education under the Professor W.S. Robertson of the New York State. This is where he said he went in 1850. Well before 29 years before those fake $5 schools actually started. I guess they had one that started in 71, I guess. But most of them 79 and above. And he went here. Now those places I've already proven were just teaching people for military training. And then some of them closed down right afterwards. This one right here, they were actually learning. As these people sit here and make complaints like this.
Gaze.
This one.
A 4-year-old.
4-year-old.
To what extent do you think the federal government was successful in its mission?
It was successful in that many of us don't speak our native language. But in a sense, they're not successful because I'm striving to learn that.
That hearing with her words. I remember seeing my mom crying as she stood and watched 6 of her 8 children being placed on a big green bus and taken to Fort Totten Indian Boarding School in Fort Totten, North Dakota. That image is forever imprinted in my mind and in my heart.
And of course, as I showed, they had the Fort Totten School here, and that's the Fort Totten Band in full military garments, as well as a Fort Totten Battalion in full military garments. She wasn't crying that hard because our people were in bands and they didn't need military outfits when they went to their schools. Now this is going to focus more on our schools for the little bit of time that I do have, but it says, okay, we had our freedmen schools. We got a guy that went to one of our freedmen schools. Not only did he actually say that he actually got a good education from a professor from New York State, but this guy ends up becoming the chief. He also, before that, he was a district judge in other town, and I think mayor. So his education was allowed to him, able to get him to become a prestigious person within the community. And I wanted to prove that, to say that how could our Indian schools be so different? Because they try to say our Indian schools are freedmen schools, even though it doesn't say the word freedmen on here. And I'm gonna show you a couple of the things where it doesn't say freedmen, but they try to say they're freedmen schools, meaning we were slaves to the people who you just saw who were complaining. So how come their schools were filled with corruption and erasure and this and blah, 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 but our schools, which are also called Indian schools, but we actually got good educations and became actual people in society? Because you got letters like this, and this is the superintendent of public schools of the Choctaw Nation, and you got it referring to, the main thing is a letter, you can read the whole thing, but it refers to the Tuscaloosa Institute. Now, it doesn't say the Tuscaloosa Freedmen Institute. It doesn't say the Tuscaloosa Institute for the Freedmen. It says the Tuscaloosa goddamn Institute. Same thing with this. That's another thing. The executive office. This is by the principal chief of the Choctaw Nation. So if he's talking to a freedman school, he's got to differentiate. I'm writing this to you freedmen motherfuckers, right? Okay, well, in here he also references the Tuscaloosa Institute. He doesn't say the Tuscaloosa niggas. He doesn't say the Tuscaloosa Institute of Freedmen. He doesn't say the Freedmen, Tuscaloosa Freedmen, blah, 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 Freedmen. No. That freedman shit was put onto these schools later, okay, to erase their history, to make them seem like they were slaves, even though they were the Indians. They came over here after the Dancing Rabbit Treaty and other treaties, settled here and started building schools and towns. And they built these things behind them as well. You got to think, in that time of the early period, where did they get the money to procure the wood, the windows, the fireplace, bricks, everything else to make these homes? I mean, not homes, but these are schoolhouses. So think about the homes. And in our pictures, we don't look like we're going to war. We look like children and young men and women who are looking to be educated. We are in our finest clothing and we are looking to be educated. And that's the theme that I see in all of these photographs, no matter what the year. Our people were out there making sure that they were getting a proper education to their people, okay? These look like children who were going to school, not military people. These look like people who actually care about the future, about why they're here, about being citizens and being Americans. While the entire time the other schools look like this in comparison, you never see us together. You never see us together. And many of these schools, all of them basically, during the times of World War I, looked like this because they were fighting for citizenship. And why we had many different so-called freedmen schools going on, the Hampton Institute, which is Hampton College, which is the HBCU, Hampton University, even as far back, was celebrating Indian Citizenship Day, celebrating the passing of the Dawes Bill from back then, Indian Citizenship Day, which pretty much gets taken later under the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, and they try to act like they celebrate the Indian Citizenship Day because of that. It's no different than how they actually did our Juneteenth. Well, we were celebrating Juneteenth by ourselves, but then eventually they established it. So eventually people are going to remember the date that it was established and not all the history prior of us celebrating it by ourselves prior, and why we celebrated it, because we celebrated the Dawes Rose Act, and that gave us citizenship. These fake folk in 1924 celebrate a different act, the Snyder Act, looking to make Indian fighters citizens. And you had to prove that you had a proper discharge, an honorable discharge, in order to get that actual citizenship. So yeah, how could two different types of Indian schools be so vastly different? We built that behind them too. In fact, that's how it really looks. Look how big that is. But let's talk about it. Again, how can our Indian schools open up before their Indian schools? They'll make excuses and say, well, it was opened up first for regular Indians, and then we moved to another school, gave you that school, and so that was your school, and then after y'all left the school burnt down, which seemed to be a running theme in some of these schools that were built by us. They were burnt after a certain time, right? In order for us not to find out that they were the real Indian schools that were opened up after the removal. And on top of that, our Indian schools wasn't actually doing erasure. It was just teaching us manual labor skills. It's not until those other ones come into play where that bullshit story comes out. Because they be playing. You got to stick around and stay tuned for the facts.